All rise. Veuillez vous lever. The International Criminal Court is now in session. L'audience de la Cour pénale internationale est ouverte. Please be seated. Veuillez vous asseoir.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are here today for the first appearance hearing of Mr. Mokom, Mr. Maxime, Jeoffroy, Eli, Mokom, Gawaka, who was surrendered to the court last week on 14 March 2022. I welcome everyone inside and outside the courtroom. Mr. Court Officer, would you please call the case?
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Your Honors. This is the second situation in the Central African Republic in the case of the prosecutor versus Maxime, Jeoffroy, Eli, Mokom, Gawaka. Case reference ICC 0114, 0122, and for the record, we are in open session.
Thank you very much. Now I invite the parties to introduce themselves. Mr. Prosecutor, would you please introduce yourself and your colleagues?
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président, Monsieur, Madame le juge. Le bureau du procureur est aujourd'hui représenté par moi-même, Mam Mandiaïnian, procureur adjoint. J'ai à mes côtés le premier substitut, Monsieur Kweko van der Puy. J'ai aussi les deux substituts, Monsieur Massimo Scagliotti et Madame Olivia Struven. Et j'ai aussi notre chargé d'affaires, Monsieur Yassine Mosfa. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. Mr. Counsel for Mr. Mokom, would you please introduce yourself? I think you're by yourself, so would you please introduce yourself? Thank you.
Good afternoon, Your Honour. My name is Nicholas Kaufmann, and I have the extreme privilege today to represent a former minister of the Central African government, Mr. Maxime Mokom, who is sitting behind me. Your Honour, since I'm appearing here on my own today, may I seize the opportunity to greet my friends from the prosecution, Mr. Kweku van der Puy, who I have known for years to be a fierce and fair prosecutor. May I congratulate Mr. Nyang on his recent election to the post of co-deputy prosecutor. I wish him all the best in the judicious execution of his role. And of course, I would have welcomed the chief prosecutor, Mr. Karim Khan, a friend of mine for years, but I do realize he has a lot on his plate these days.
Thank you very much. Now, pre-trial chamber 2 comprises of Judge Antoine Kesambe Mindua, sitting on my right, and Judge Tomoko Akane, sitting on my left. I am Rosario Salvatore Itala, and I am the presiding judge of pre-trial chamber 2. Now, Mr. Mokom, good afternoon. Would you please stand up and state your full name as well as your date and place of birth?
Je m'appelle Maxime Jeoffroy Eli Mokom Gawaka, né le 30 décembre 1978 à Bangui.
Of which year, sir?
1978 à Bangui.
Thank you very much. You can sit. Now, Mr. Mokom, please listen to me carefully, because now I will explain what is the nature and the purpose of this hearing, which is called the initial appearance hearing. So this is mainly for you to hear. Today's hearing is neither a trial, not a hearing regarding the confirmation or the non-confirmation of charges against you. Evidence will not be adduced or presented, and your individual criminal responsibility will not be discussed today. Pursuant to Article 60, first paragraph of the Rome Statute, and to Rule 121, first paragraph of the Rules of Procedure and Evidence of the International Criminal Court, the scope of today's hearing is limited to 3 matters. The first is that the Chamber must satisfy itself that the person subject to the arrest, to the warrant of arrest, yourself in this case, is informed of the crimes he is alleged to have committed. Secondly, the Chamber must be satisfied that this person is informed of his rights under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. And thirdly, the Chamber must set the date on which it intends to hold the hearing to confirm or to decline to confirm the charges. Now, Mr. Mokom, first of all, have you been informed of the crimes you are alleged to have committed?
Oui.
Thank you. I will now have the charges brought against you being read in the courtroom by the court officer. Mr. Court Officer, would you please read out the charges as presented in the public redacted version dated 22 March today of the warrant of arrest against Mr. Mokom issued on 10 December 2018.
Thank you, Your Honor. On 10 December 2018, Pretrial Chamber 2 concluded that there were reasonable grounds to believe that Mr. Mokom is criminally responsible pursuant to Article 25(3)(a) and C of the Rome Statute for crimes against humanity and war crimes committed in the context of and associated with a non-international armed conflict. This concerns various locations in the Central African Republic. The relevant crimes against humanity are found in Article 7(1) A, B, D, E, F, H, I, and K, and Article 25(3)(f) of the statute, and the relevant war crimes in Article 8(2)(c)(1) and 2(e)(1), 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 11, and 12, and Article 25(3)(f) of the statute. Specified per location for the alleged conduct in Bangui, including Katan and Boying, from 5 December 2013 to 20 December 2013, it concerns the crimes against humanity of murder, deportation or forcible transfer of population, and persecution, and the war crimes of murder, intentionally directing an attack against the civilian population, intentionally directing an attack against buildings dedicated to religion, destroying or seizing the property of an adversary, and displacement of the civilian population. For Bosangoa in Uham Prefecture from 5 December 2013 to April 2014, it concerns the crimes against humanity of murder and attempted murder, deportation or forcible transfer of population, imprisonment or other severe deprivation of physical liberty, other inhumane acts, and persecution, and the war crimes of murder and attempted murder, intentionally directing an attack against the civilian population, intentionally directing an attack against buildings dedicated to religion, pillaging, destroying or seizing the property of an adversary, and displacement of the civilian population. For Yaloke and Gaga in Ombela, Mpoko Prefecture, from on or about the 17th of January 2014 to at least mid-2015, it concerns the crimes against humanity of murder, deportation, or forcible transfer of population, extermination, imprisonment, or other severe deprivation of physical liberty, other inhumane acts, and persecution, and the war crimes of murder, intentionally directing an attack against the civilian population, intentionally directing an attack against buildings dedicated to religion, pillaging, destroying or seizing the property of an adversary, and displacement of the civilian population. For Bosem Tele in Uham Pende Prefecture, from 18 January 2014 to at least July 2014, it concerns the crimes against humanity of murder, deportation or forcible transfer of population, imprisonment or other severe deprivation of physical liberty, other inhumane acts, and persecution, and the war crimes of murder, mutilation, intentionally directing an attack against the civilian population, intentionally directing an attack against buildings dedicated to religion, pillaging, destroying or seizing the property of an adversary, and displacement of the civilian population. For Boda in Lobaye Prefecture, from on or about the 29th of January 2014 to at least September 2014, it concerns the crimes against humanity of murder, deportation, or forcible transfer of population, imprisonment or other severe deprivation of physical liberty, other inhumane acts, and persecution, and the war crimes of murder, intentionally directing an attack against the civilian population, pillaging, destroying or seizing the property of an adversary, intentionally directing an attack against personnel, installations, material, units, or vehicles involved in a humanitarian assistance, and displacement of the civilian population. For Carnot in Mambere Kadey Prefecture, from late January 2014 to at least February 2016, it concerns the crimes against humanity of murder, deportation, or forcible transfer of population, imprisonment, or other severe deprivation of physical liberty, other inhumane acts, and persecution, and the war crimes of murder, intentionally directing an attack against the civilian population, intentionally directing an attack against buildings dedicated to religion, pillaging, destroying or seizing the property of an adversary, and displacement of the civilian population. For Berberati in Mambere Kadey Prefecture, from on or about the 10th of February 2014 to at least December 2014, it concerns the crimes against humanity of murder, deportation, or forcible transfer of population, imprisonment, or other severe deprivation of physical liberty, other inhumane acts, and persecution, and the war crimes of murder, intentionally directing an attack against the civilian population, intentionally directing an attack against buildings dedicated to religion, pillaging, destroying or seizing the property of an adversary, and displacement of the civilian population. For the incident at Yamwara School base in Boying It concerns the crimes against humanity of imprisonment or other severe deprivation of physical liberty, torture, persecution, and forced disappearance, and other inhumane acts, and the war crimes of torture, cruel treatment, and mutilation. For Mbaiki in Lobaye Prefecture, from on or about the 30th of January 2014 to on or about the 6th of February 2014. It concerns the crimes against humanity of deportation or forcible transfer of population and persecution, and the war crimes of intentionally directing an attack against buildings dedicated to religion, destroying or seizing the property of an adversary, and displacement of the civilian population. Then, finally, not linked to a specific location, the war crime of enlistment of children under the age of 15 and using them to participate actively in hostilities from at least December 2013 to at least August 2014.
Very much, Mr. Court Officer. Now, Mr. Mokom, have you been informed of the rights which are accorded to you as a suspect by the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court?
Oui.
Thank you very much. You may sit. I will anyhow highlight some of those rights to you, but also to the public, as they are particularly important at this stage of the proceedings. Well, first of all, you have the right to be informed promptly, expeditiously, and in detail of the nature, the cause, and the content of the charges in a language that you fully understand and speak. In this respect, would you please indicate to the Chamber which language or languages you fully understand and speak?
Français, Sango.
Thank you very much. Secondly, you have the right to defend yourself and the right to be provided with legal assistance without payment if you lack sufficient means to pay for it. You have the right to have free of cost the assistance of a competent interpreter and the rights to be provided to those translations as in the view of the Chamber are necessary to meet the requirement of fairness. You have the right to have adequate time and facilities for the preparation of your defense and to communicate freely with counsel of your choosing. You have the right to remain silent, and you cannot be compelled to testify against yourself or to confess guilt. You have the right to make an unsworn oral written statement in your defense, but not now. You have the right to receive from the office of the prosecutor as soon as possible material showing or tending to show your innocence or mitigating your guilt or affecting the credibility of incriminating evidence. At the confirmation of charges hearing, you will also have the right to object to the charges, to challenge the evidence which will be presented by the prosecution, and to present evidence yourself. And in the case the charges are not confirmed by the pre-trial chamber, there will be no trial and the proceedings would be terminated. Finally, you have the right to apply for interim release pending trial. Now, Mr. Mokom, do you have any observation to make before the judges, before the chamber, about the conditions of your transfer to the International Criminal Court, or about the conditions of your detention so far in the court's detention center here in The Hague?
If Your Honour pleases, maybe I will address this matter. Mr. Mokom has given me permission to address the chamber on the matter.
I would like to hear from Mr. Mokom first,
Okay.
and you can complement. Mr. Mokom.
Monsieur le Président, mon conseiller est chargé de vous parler de ça.
So you don't have any remark to make? Well, if you, sir, this is the point. Your counsel will be allowed to speak, but if there's anything, any concern that you have, we would like to hear it from you. Then your counsel will complement as being the legal experts. But if there's anything that you want us to hear, we would like to hear it from you.
Le conseil est chargé de vous dire ça, Monsieur le Président.
All right, have a seat. Mr. Kaufman, please.
Your Honour, may I say at the outset that my client doesn't have any observations regarding the conditions of his detention at the ICC. However, I do have a few observations on Mr. Mokom's transfer to the International Criminal Court and his treatment at the hands of the authorities of the Republic of Chad. It didn't escape my notice that the learned prosecutor, Mr. Khan, issued a press release a few days ago in which he expressed his heartfelt gratitude to the Chadian authorities for facilitating the transfer of Mr. Mokom to this court. But I ask, for what exactly was he heaping this lavish praise on Chad? Let me tell you the facts as Mr. Mokom related them to me. On the 27th of February, he was surprised on a dusty road near the border with the Central African Republic, bundled with brute force into the back seat of a security vehicle and driven 13 hours in the blistering heat, sandwiched between two security officials to N'Djamena. Upon arrival, he was thrown into a filthy, mosquito-infested cell in the dungeons of the National Security Agency. All the money which Mr. Mokom had on his person was seized, and with most of it, it was used to pay the officers who had brought him all the way to N'Djamena. The remainder of his money was used to buy his daily ration of food, mouldy bread and a tin of sardines. With a raffia mat on a stone floor for a bed and an empty tub of butter to relieve himself, Mr. Mokom was kept incommunicado for a week without anyone knowing where he was. Finally, on the 7th of March, Mr. Mokom received a visit from the Procureur de la République, who asked him if he had anything to say about the ICC charges which he read to him. Mr. Mokom mentioned that he had a lawyer called Mr. Kaufman, but he was told that he had no right to a lawyer. The following day, he received yet another visit, this time from no less than the Procureur Général de la République himself. And once again, the semblance of a judicial process took place, and Mr. Mokom asked for his Israeli ICC lawyer. And I can assure you, Your Honours, there aren't too many of them knocking about. At no stage did the Procureur Général inquire with Mr. Mokom as to whether his rights had been respected. At no stage was Mr. Mokom told that he had a right to seek interim release in Chad, pending surrender to the court. And believe you me, had I known that the arrest warrant dated back to the 10th of December 2018, I would have petitioned for such interim release. In any event, Mr. Mokom was slung back into the darkness for yet one more week, when suddenly he was moved into new, more salubrious surroundings of the variety reserved, no doubt, to impress visiting human rights organizations and the ICRC. he was greeted by an official from the ICC registry who told him that he had now arrived to transfer him to The Hague. Now, Your Honours, this is not the first time that this learned court has heard similar accounts of abuse at the hands of state parties to the Rome Statute. It happened with Germain Katanga, it happened with Charles Blé Goudet, and it happened with Alfred Yekatom. So before Mr. Khan applauds Chad with vigour for its efficient cooperation, maybe he would like to satisfy himself next time that Article 59 of the Rome Statute has been respected. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Prosecutor. Do you want to make any submission, any statement on this?
À ce stade, Monsieur le Président, Madame, Monsieur le Juge, le bureau du procureur n'a pas de commentaire spécifique à faire sur ce point.
Mr. Kaufman, we take note of what you have said. You can, of course, make written submissions if you so wish. We also note that the treatment which allegedly was reserved to Mr. Mokom in Chad is outside the competence of this bench. But you are allowed, of course, to make submissions if you so wish, and the chamber, if it is appropriate to do so, will consider it. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Now, the chamber will set the date for the start of the hearings for the confirmation of charges. We have considered all relevant factors, including the need for the parties and participants to prepare properly, and particularly the rights for the suspect to defend himself fully, the rights of Mr. Mokom to be tried without undue delay. Therefore, the date for the commencement of the confirmation of charges hearing is set for Tuesday, 31st January 2023. So I repeat, 31 January 2023. This is the date for the commencement of the charges hearing. Depending on the developments of the proceedings, this date may be changed as provided by Rule 121, Paragraph 7 of the Rules of Procedure and Evidence upon request of either the prosecutor or the defense or by the pre-trial chamber on its own motion. Before concluding the hearing, I would like to inform the parties of the following steps in the proceedings. First, I recall that pursuant to Rule 121, Paragraph 2b of the Rules of Procedure and Evidence, status conferences shall be held to ensure that disclosure takes place in a transparent, efficient, and expeditious manner. The Chamber intends to schedule such status conferences. Parties may also request such hearings to be scheduled. In due course, the Chamber will issue a set of decisions on the conduct of proceedings, including on the modalities and procedure for the disclosure of evidence, a calendar for the disclosure of evidence in order to ensure organized and expeditious disclosure between the parties, with communication of disclosed evidence to the Chamber, on principles for reductions, and on the participation of victims. In this regard, the Chamber has taken note of the request of the Office of the Prosecutor filed yesterday for a number of protocols to be put in place. The Chamber will consider this request and set the deadline for the defense to respond in due course. Finally, with a view to ensuring that disclosure commences as soon as possible and takes place under satisfactory conditions, the Chamber instructs the prosecutor to file observations on the modalities and procedure for evidence disclosure by 31st March 2022. Now, before we come to an end, Mr. Prosecutor, is there any additional point you would like to raise with the Chamber?
Monsieur le Président, il n'y a aucun point que le bureau du procureur entend soulever à ce stade. Merci.
Thank you. Mr. Kaufman, is there any matter you wish to raise?
I would respectfully request that we have a short confidential session at the termination of this hearing, if that's possible, to discuss certain matters which have been raised prior to the initial appearance today.
Look, Mr. Kaufman, in general, the Chamber does not wish to go into private session during this kind of hearings. If it's something which is closely related to the scope of this hearing, then we will do it. Otherwise, we would rather read your submissions. Is it something closely related to the scope and nature of this hearing?
It's to do with disclosure.
Excuse me?
It's to do with disclosure, Your Honour, and
All
my
right,
access to information.
Okay, let's now... Well, okay, Mr. Mokom, is there any matter you would like to raise, anything you would like to say before the end of the hearing?
Je n'ai rien, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Court Officer, let's move into private session, please.
We're back in open session, Mr. President.
All right, well then, we came to the end of the first appearance hearing of Mr. Mokom. I thank the parties, our interpreters, our guards, our registry and courtroom staff, and now the hearing is closed. Thank you very much.
All rise. Veuillez vous lever.